Fadiman, good evening to you. We will begin with Representative Kuster. Granite Staters have been watching the images of a caravan of thousands of migrants currently make its way across Mexico. Many of them started their journeys in Honduras, seeking a better life in the United States, hoping to escape poverty and violence. Do you think the U.S. should allow any of these people to enter to seek asylum or to be in the U.S. legally for any period of time?
Well, Jean, let me first of all thank you for having us, and thanks for this debate. And I want to thank my opponent, Mr. Negron, for accepting our civility commitment. We've had a good campaign. Let me just take you back a few years, and that is to comprehensive immigration reform passed by the United States Senate 5.5 years ago. 2/3 of the Senate voted for it, very bipartisan. Kelly Ayotte, John McCain, Jeanne Shaheen. I would have voted for it the very next day, and it would have strengthened our borders and provided lawful immigration. And it would have made for a rule of law that we should have in our country. What I would suggest is that we should have done that, and we should go further. We should allow people to apply for asylum in their home country. These are asylum seekers. They are fleeing from persecution, from violence in their home country. And so we need a lawful process for them to seek asylum. If they fulfill those protocols, then yes, they would be allowed in, and if not, then they would be sent back.
And Mr. Negron, does the U.S. have a moral obligation to assist people in need of coming to our border? Should this caravan get any help?
Well, thank you, Jean. That's a great question. I think what the United States has a moral obligation is to its U.S. citizens. That's what we have a moral obligation to. And you know, it's funny that we talk up here that we try to do things 5 years ago. Well, that just tells me that we were ineffective 5 years ago. The problem is that, you know, I am of 100% Hispanic heritage. My grandfather came here from Mexico in 1921. I was talking to somebody the other day. What's really funny to me is that this caravan of people who want to come to our country seeking the opportunities, which we still are that beacon of hope, I would have expected an American flag in front of this caravan coming to this country. Instead, I still see the flag of the country they're fleeing. So I'm kind of questioning what is it that they have. And you know, let's not all throw everybody into asylum. We don't know that yet. But we do know is that we're a land of laws. There's a right way to do it. We're not doing it, and we need to get back to it. So let's process every one of those people through, and if they meet the criteria to come into this country, then we'll allow them in. But the president has a fundamental responsibility to protect the citizens of the United States, and I think that's what he's doing.
Mr. Negron, do you think that the U.S. should spend money to support the economies or the governments of Latin American countries so that the crime or poverty there doesn't translate into more people trying to enter the U.S.? Well,
you know, I don't think there's a direct correlation, Jean, of money into stopping crime and people coming in. You know, the State Department does a lot of work with other countries all the way around the world. So it all depends on what the money's being used for. It could be for education, it could be for some of their infrastructure. So I don't know necessarily, but it isn't to buy or bribe people to either come in or stay. It's about having an opportunity to help some of the other countries around the world. We've done that our entire life since we've started as a nation, and I think we need to continue to do that. But, you know, it would be a function of what it is that the money's being used for. And the president has said, you know, if we continue this caravan, in good faith we've given you money. You know, please don't send us these people unless they're properly vetted. And I think the United States still, again, has a responsibility to protect not only its citizens, but its fiscal responsibility.
And Representative Kuster, would you support aid of any kind to any countries to prevent people from fleeing to the U.S.?
Well, I was shocked when the president said he was going to withdraw all the aid from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, the countries that these people are fleeing from the violence. Yes, indeed, we should be helping with their security, with their criminal justice system to make sure that people are safe. I went to the border because I was shocked by our policy, this president's policy of separating children and families. It's un-American. And what I learned when I met these people was that they were fleeing. Their families had been killed, their businesses had been blown up, and they were literally grabbing their children and running, taking off. It's over 1,000 miles. We should be trying to help them at home and give them the opportunity, if they do want to seek asylum, to do that in their home country so that they would avoid this perilous journey.
And Representative Kuster, in part of an interview that was just released today, President Trump said that he will sign an executive order that ends birthright citizenship, meaning that babies born in the U.S. to a mother who's not a U.S. citizen would not be granted automatic citizenship. What do you think about this?
Well, I think the president's gotten carried away with his executive powers, and I agree with the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, a Republican, by the way, who said he does not have the authority. Look, this is the 14th Amendment to our Constitution. And what it says is if you are born in our country, you are a citizen of our country. He cannot do this by executive order. There's yet to be anyone who agrees with him on this. And I think it would be a substantial process to try to get an amendment to change the 14th Amendment to our Constitution. Look, it's the wrong direction, and Mr. Negron's family has a very compassionate story about immigration, and immigration strengthens our community with people who serve in our military, who start businesses in our country. My own family didn't come by caravan, they came in a very crowded ship. And two of my family on both sides, both grandparents, died en route. And I think we need to look at what immigration does for businesses in this state. People need the labor, and these people will create new jobs, create new businesses, and we will all benefit.
And Mr. Negron, would you support the president's effort to end birthright citizenship?
Well, I will certainly do one thing, and that would be listening to what the president's intent is. You know, this is just another example of resisting anything that's coming out of the White House. You know, it's the game plan over and over again. You know, it's about resisting and obstructing and eventually trying to impeach our president. Look, if there's an idea that's coming out of the White House, I think we have to be able to sit down at the table and figure out what the intent and what the president wants to do. I think he clearly knows that he can't change the Constitution on his own, and to infer that with an executive order, that's what he's trying to do. But once again, if there's an issue, we need to sit down with the president and figure out what it is, and we need to do that in a collective manner.